Hi, this is Bill Bianchi with Progressive Democrats of America in Chicago. We're talking today with Dick Simpson about the election, and I'm going to read a little of Dick's background so that I get it right. He's the former Chicago alderman of the 44th Ward, 1971 to 79. He led the opposition bloc in Chicago City Council against Mayors Daley and Bilandic. He's a former congressional candidate. He wrote a regular column for the Chicago Sun-Times, and currently he is the head of the political science department at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And in his spare times, he's authored over a dozen books. Do I have that right, Dick?
Close enough.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for talking to us. Let's start with some election analysis, and then go into some conclusions and great thoughts about what it all means for the progressive movement and nationally and here in Chicago. Why don't we start with a summary of what you thought happened, what really stood out for you from the results of the election?
Well, political scientists first ask a question about elections, whether it's a critical realigning election. An example would be the New Deal elections of the 1930s, which brought the Democrats to power for generations thereafter. And the short answer is no, this wasn't. What has happened is more like a wave election we had in 2010. The Tea Party and the Republicans coming to significant power, taking over the House of Representatives, and now the wave has essentially receded. The Republicans have significant problems, really three of them. Women voted against them, minorities voted against them, and whites didn't vote for them as much as they had hoped for. The numbers were down in pure numbers of whites voting.
I see. Okay. What do the results mean for the president and then for the people in Illinois and Chicago?
Well, first of all, the balance in the Senate has changed, so they're now, the president's party has 55 senators, which gives them a more comfort margin. It still doesn't let them apply closer to filibuster, but it does allow them, if someone's absent or if there's a problem on a particular vote and they lose a vote of a single senator, it isn't going to derail any of the programs. In the House, they're not anywhere close to a majority. Some of the votes are still out being counted in some districts, but the Republicans still have a significant majority in the House, and are not going to lose that in the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And so the consequences for the president's plans and hopes?
Well, a lot depends on whether or not there can be a compromise, and that isn't sheer numbers. But I would think, and also with the president, his greatest opportunities are in the immediate time after the election. He has the most moral presence at that point. He has the hope of being able to sway policies. So on questions like the fiscal cliff, it is quite likely they'll be able to find some method. It'll be a compromise. No one will be happy with it, but it will avert disaster, and we then won't go into a worse recession.
Mm-hmm. Just in your opinion, is this fiscal cliff, is it as serious as it's being portrayed? Is it somewhat overblown for political advantage?
It is as serious as it's being portrayed. The cuts would be so significant in the federal budget, and the tax rates would go back up for the average middle-class person. That first of all, people would have less money because they would have a higher tax to pay, and a higher payroll tax, by the way. And on the other side, defense spending will go drastically down. And while progressives don't like defense spending because what it's used for, that is a major stimulus to the economy. So it is likely, if we actually not only go over the fiscal cliff but don't solve it soon thereafter, we will indeed force a recession. Given the state of situation in Europe and in China, it will probably cause a worldwide recession, if not a worldwide depression. So it's in everybody's interest to find a solution. That really is a matter of politics, not just a matter of elections.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In your view, how did this election differ from 2008 in terms of the voting blocs and consequences for various groups?
Well, one of the most obvious ways it differed is the Latino vote became more important because the Latino vote was critical in a number of the main states that had a chance of being swing states in the election. So states like Florida, states like Ohio, states like Nevada, all had significant Latino population. And the Latino vote is a growing vote. First of all, it's the youngest population among any of the racial groups. And it means there are going to be more Latinos in the electorate every election after this. So while this wasn't quite the year of Latinos, it was an opportunity for Latinos to make gains. Women were very important in the election, and as a result of that, there are going to be more women in the Congress than in the history of the United States. 78 women in the House of Representatives and a surprising 20 in the Senate. And we've never had anything like that. So it's this is really sort of the year of the woman in ways that were overlooked. And the youth vote, I believe, is going to continue to show up as important. In 2008, 52% of the youth voted, and voted very heavily for Obama. In 2010, the youth vote went down to 24%, and that's why the Republicans got elected. The youth vote is back up again this year. We don't have the final figures because those are hard to determine. But I think when we actually look at it, we'll see that youth are again an important part of this coalition that elected the president and a number of congressmen. And some very important congressmen got defeated, Tea Party congressmen like Joe Walsh here in Illinois.
Right. Now, to get in sort of the inside baseball on the Latino vote in particular, it seemed like the president made a move but it was sort of like the smallest move he could have made, and but it was significant apparently. Do you think he's going to have to deliver a little bit more to the Latino vote this time around? Are they going to be happy with, or will the Republicans change?
Well, the Republicans have a ridiculous policy, which is simply put up a big wall and shoot everybody that comes across. That's not very enduring. It doesn't matter if you're a U.S. citizen who's Latino. You know somebody that came fairly recently to the United States, and you're sympathetic to the immigration issues. By the way, it's more than Latinos. Asians have a huge problem with our immigration policy. So do Europeans. The immigration issue actually cuts larger, but the Latino vote is also premised on economic policies. And to the extent that the Republicans can be characterized as being a party of the rich, we don't care about the rest of you. We're not going to have any additional income tax on the most wealthy in the country. Those are not popular in the Latino community. It's more than just a straight immigration policy that swung the Latino vote, not only this election, but in previous ones. Because the Latino vote was up for grabs. It could have gone either way. And the Republicans have managed to somehow alienate the vast majority of Latino voters.
Are you expecting them to change then, the Republicans to have a more conciliatory approach to them?
Well, politicians don't always read and write well, but they always count well. And unless they're, somehow lost the ability to count on the Republican side, I think they have to change their policies. You can't plan to lose the women's vote, all minorities, and not even carry the white male vote by significant numbers and still hope to be a dominant party in the country. Yes, they can stay close, but they can't win under this policy. Now in districts, that differs because of the makeup of the district.
Okay. Now you say they didn't win the white male vote by significant numbers, but that's what one of the things I thought I heard in the media that they did win. That.
Yeah, that is what was in the media. But I believe the numbers will show out that all whites were something like 47% for Romney over Obama. It wasn't the sort of landslide. What really happened is 7 million whites didn't show up to vote, and that's an interesting problem. It's a problem for progressives.
Compared to 2008.
Compared to 2008. So it's not just that Latinos and blacks voted more strongly than might have been expected, but whites didn't show up for the day. And that's probably because they were perhaps alienated by Obama, but they read the negative ads, they heard Romney speak himself, and they said, no way we're going to vote for this guy. Even though he's white, that isn't enough for us.
Does anybody have any clue as to whether these 7 million are potential progressives or potential right-wingers, or what their political outlook might be?
Most likely they're independent and persuadable. I don't think that progressives stayed home in large numbers, and I don't think real conservatives stayed home in large numbers. So I think it's the ones who aren't completely ideologically motivated, who probably were most likely. There were a few who, as a matter of principle, didn't show up to vote, but those, I think, are few.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the Democratic Party, nationally at least. As I received, and you probably received, and all of you probably received, hundreds of emails from the party over the past 6 months, or people representing them, and they all pretty much said, at least the ones I saw, the Republicans are coming, run, or, send money.
Yes.
They said very little about what they plan to do and why we should vote for them. Do you think that's going to continue, or are they going to have to develop some kind of a strategy or a platform?
I think you will see at least the president taking even stronger stands, because he's free to do so. And I think he will be able to articulate a vision that is probably, certainly in comparison to the Republicans, more progressive than their vision. I'm not sure who would be the progressive spokesman in the country at the moment, besides the president, and I understand many progressives don't think he goes far enough and so forth, but there isn't a clear, when you had Ted Kennedy or you've had other people in the past, there have been people who say, well, those are our spokesmen, and they're holding out the, the promise for what we'll be next time around, or 4 years from now, or whenever. So I think progressives would do well to find new issues. Health care, while it's not a perfect bill, has at least been one. So what's next, I think, is probably a question the American public would want to know if you want to achieve much more progressive policies.
Mm-hmm. So let me get straight now. In 2009, I think most people would agree that we saw the president move to the right as he's compared to his campaign speeches. What are you expecting in this period now? Would you see him move to the right, to be conciliatory with Republicans, or do you think he's going to move a little bit to the left?
I think they're different issues. I think on questions like the fiscal cliff, you will see the president have to make a compromise with the Republicans. Mm-hmm. And that's going to mean that progressives won't be entirely happy with the bill that comes out. We'll be happy if we don't have to endure a longer recession. But it's not going to be a progressive bill by much. I don't think, we may have to compromise and not tax the rich as much as might be desirable in order to get it through. And so there will be a compromise, I think, on that's just because there's too much at stake. On the other issues, I think the president can push matters forward. He will encounter difficulty in the House of Representatives. He has enough of a strong vote in the Senate to be able to carry any legislation that's reasonable in the Senate. But I think you'll also have him articulating a vision that's more progressive. And I guess the question is, which of the leaders in the House and the Senate will be offering a vision on the main issues that concern Americans.
Mm-hmm. So who's going to emerge?
Maybe
it'll be Elizabeth Warren.
Could be Elizabeth Warren. Someone like Durbin might move more left than his more moderate position. I doubt it'll be Harry Reid or Pelosi. They've already, sort of established where they stand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about the possibility for the growth of an independent progressive base, including the possibilities for third parties, but not one that can operate a little more independently from the Democratic Party than they have in the past? Do you see that this election has moved in that direction in any way?
No. What you had on the other side was the Tea Party, one election cycle back, have a major political impact. The Occupy Wall Street movement decided not to become involved in politics, that is, not to back electoral candidates. And so the issues which they were articulating well and which people had sympathy with gained no traction in the electoral arena, or not much. So there is a problem. There would be plenty of room to push from the left into the Democratic Party. An independent party is a little tricky, and this is the reason. Political party, we have a two-party system, not just for all the usual reasons, but because the laws make it impossible to have a positive three-party or four-party system in the parliamentary sense. So what has to happen is, like happened at the Civil War period, the Whigs have to be thrown out and the Republicans have to become the new party. None of the parties that have come along, the Native parties or the others, have gotten enough votes to be able to be credible as a real challenge to an existing party. So my expectation is the parties themselves will remain two parties, and that while it's possible to push candidates, you could push Green Party candidates locally, for instance, and you might do that with some success in some localities. But primarily you're going to have to win through the Democratic Party. And there are a lot of bad Democrats running around loose that you could run against credibly by articulating other policies.
Did you care to name some?
No.
Okay. Let's take a look at the state, Illinois and the city. How does this election advance the agenda and the cause of progressives here in Chicago or statewide, or does it not? Does it detract?
It makes a major difference. The Democrats have a veto-proof majority now in both the House and the Senate and the governor. What that means, in particular the lame duck session or soon after, is that they have the votes to be able to make the income tax, the temporary income tax, permanent. That's important because if it isn't done, we fall off in the state a fiscal cliff after 2014 when the income tax goes away. We would have to keep the income tax and keep spending down to be able not to have the fiscal cliff. The second thing is pension reform, and the pension reform on the table is pretty grim. It's going to mean people are paying more. It's going to mean things like this university will be paying their share of our taxes instead of the state paying that share. That would cost this university $186 million a year.
Wow.
It's $186 million that isn't going to hiring more teachers or giving more student aid or the three university system that we're part of. We have 70,000 students. It's pretty hard to divide that up by $186 million. Now they're talking about phasing it in over 10 or 20 years, and so it doesn't hit all at one day, but there's no hope the state would make that up. So should there be pension reform? Yes, but the pension reform on the table is probably going to be difficult for both the people within the system and for the institutions in the state. But the Democrats have the votes. They can shape it in a way that's less harmful, and in terms of semi-progressive income tax, keeping the current income tax and not having a rollback in 2014 is very important. That's before you even get to policy issues. That's just on the fiscal policies, and we'll know within a few months if that's been done or not.
Okay. Progressives like PDA and other groups and unions have an agenda here in the state, and it's similar to what's nationally. But in the state, we're talking about things like stopping the cuts to Medicaid. We're talking about a Robin Hood tax that's nationally, but there's also some talk about it locally because we have the CME here in Chicago. We have Medicare for All is something that there's a bill in the legislature. There are a number of things, and of course locally it's to prevent the school closings. What kind of advice would you give progressives who are working on these difficult but individual issues?
First of all, to pick only a couple of them to work on at the same time, because you need a clear message to be able to get the public support necessary. And second, in political parlance, you need to find a champion. That is, you need an elected official, like, say, Harold Washington was when he was mayor, or someone like that, among the current elected officials, because we don't get another election for a couple of years, 3 in the city, 2 in the state. So need to pick 2 or 3 issues only to highlight, and there's some creative ways to try and do that. There's talk of an elected school board. It passed with 86% of the vote in the precincts and wards where it was allowed on the ballot. We're going to be talking about the possibility of an elected police board, primarily to make sure that they do things entirely differently than they're doing them. There are other issues like that, but they need to be clear. They need to be a short 6-month campaign effort, They need to have some spokesperson, both among those like unions and groups, but also some elected official if they can be found. And my suspicion is there's some elected officials who would be willing to step up, maybe not across the board, but would take on the school issue or the police issue or the pension issue or the whichever one. There needs to be a consensus quickly, and there needs to move forward immediately. Otherwise, yeah, the dissatisfaction may build up, but that's not really a very good way to build a political movement.
Okay. What are your thoughts about the progressive bloc in the city council? Do you think it has legs?
Well, the problem with, even if you call it the independent or the reform bloc, it has a significant problem, and that is they have not been able to win, and I formed the one in the city council back in the 70s, so I know about it. You have to have two roles. You have to have a spokesperson, and sometimes plural, and you have to have an organizer. And so far, most of them are not willing to take the organizer role. It's not as glamorous, but it is essential. Because you need, what you do as a progressive bloc is you build up, you were calling it an agenda earlier, you build up an alternative vision. We're fighting about what the future of the city of Chicago should be. And with Rahm Emanuel, there's a pretty clear notion that, yeah, he's an okay CEO, he gets things done, he does a new press conference every day on a new program. He doesn't understand democracy or doesn't support democracy, isn't willing to go to the people and talk about what should be done and let them advise him rather than him just telling them what he did for him this week. So there's plenty of grounds in the city council. The aldermen tend to be a little frightened. Gee, I'll make an enemy of Rahm Emanuel. He won't like me, he'll shout at me. That's silly. We elected them to be adults and to play a role like that. And once there is a clear spokesman and a clear organizer, it's possible. Some of the aldermen are beginning to have more doubts, but in the current budget, for instance, in the first test vote on the budget, no one was willing to propose significant amendments. When I was alderman, we proposed entire alternative budgets of 100 amendments.
Wow. The teacher strike, what is your take on the status of the forces between the teachers and the CPS and the mayor?
Well, the most important thing about the teacher strike is it broke away from Rahm Emanuel's support base, the unions, not just the teachers, but the police, the firefighters, all the unions except the construction unions. Construction unions depend on their jobs through City Hall in a more direct way, and they're not willing to back the mayor, whoever they are. So the most important political fact was the change of the landscape. And we're now in police negotiations and fire negotiations, and I expect those to intensify this split. In terms of the relations with CPS, CPS has to pay attention to the teachers. You know, they can't strike over something as simple as school closings, but they can certainly provide leadership, even though they have a contract for the next couple of years. So I think you'll see teachers joining with other groups, and I think they will have allies. Again, around what? There will be school closings. The real issue is how do we choose the schools and how many, and which ones, and why are they being closed, and which ones are going to provide the best opportunity for the school kids. And that's not been very well addressed by the school board. It still hasn't announced which schools are going to be closed.
Right, it's going to put that off until March, it looks like.
Well, they'll put it off as long as they can get by with it.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've covered a lot. How about a final conclusion or thought about the results of the election? And
well, in general, it was a useful election. One of the things that happened here in Illinois is that the Democrats won 4 new House seats over Republicans, and they won 3 of the 4 here in the suburban area. And what that means is Democrats, and often progressive Democrats, have begun to have a significant role in the suburbs. It isn't all just free Republican territory now. And that makes things much more competitive, which means they could make policy demands, not just in the Congress, but across Illinois that would have to be heeded.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much, Dick.
My pleasure, Bill.
Bill Bianchi with Progressive Democrats of America in Chicago.